Most of the wood in the Redwood violin is actually apple wood, and I wanted to know a little more about where my piece of apple wood might have come from. We've come out here today to meet Chad Frick, who's an apple grower out near Occidental, and he's going to show us around the orchard, tell us something about the apple industry around here.
Yeah, this orchard's been here for well over 100 years, about 150 years.
Oh.
It originally was a peach orchard, but for at least the last 100 years, it's been apples.
Uh-huh.
And there's multiple generations of plantings here. You got old, ancient 100-year-old Gravensteins and Rhode Island greenings and Arkansas blacks, which are kind of traditional heirloom homesteader varieties, and then replanted with Golden Delicious and Rome Beauties, which are big processing apples that are planted around here a lot, and little sections of interesting things too, like less planted around here, McIntosh, Newtown Pippin, Jonathan's.
And so you've got remnants of all of those still
Yeah,
down
so
on
they're
this?
all here, and that's one of the things that makes this a good orchard for hard cider, is you have all the different components that make up the blend of a good, complex, fine, traditional hard cider.
Most of the varieties are grafted.
All apple trees are grafted to the rootstock,
Uh-huh.
so like the grapes, you would have the rootstock variety, and then you graft the apple to it.
So what would be the stock variety around here?
Well, what they call standard rootstock, which produces these full 20-foot, 25-foot tall trees. Which is not how they grow apples anymore. That's one of the disadvantages Sebastopol has versus the rest of the world, is apple farming technology has moved on to be more efficient, more productive, and up in Washington State and Michigan, everywhere, they grow them like grapes, and they use a dwarfing rootstock, so they grow trees that are only so tall. Sometimes they even space them close together like that, like grapes, the smaller ones, and then it can all be worked down low and with machines, and more importantly, they come in production faster. A tree like this can take 10-15 years to start producing, whereas a dwarf rootstock, you get in the third year you can start having a decent harvest.
Here we go.
Yeah, so this tree is an example of what I've been doing in the orchard, converting existing trees to a new variety through grafting onto them and pruning out the old wood and generating new wood. That's called top working. So this tree, which is on a more dwarfing rootstock, was Rome Beauty. Everywhere that there's a little blue mark has been grafted a new variety onto it. And so now the entire top is Wixon crabapple growing on a trunk of Rome Beauty, and that's how you change a tree. It's about maybe a 3-year process, and got a good harvest off of it this year. Most of the time, it's commonly done in commercial orchards because it takes so long to grow a new tree. You can use that old root system, but normally they'll come through and they'll just hack them off down here and do just a few major grafts and then regenerate. But in this orchard, there's not enough fertility, there's too much disease, the trees are already too stressed, so I have to be really delicate, and I do this more grafts up higher, it's what they call frameworking, but without opening big wounds, you find all the points where you can just take that old branch, put on a new one, and no wound, and to heal, and it doesn't stress the tree very much, and I've been pretty successful with that.
Does it take on characteristics of the rootstock as well, or does it pretty much stay?
Yeah, no, it doesn't.
The flavor of the graft.
Only what the rootstock contributes to the tree as a whole, vigor,
the hardiness,
maybe, and but no, everything. It's two separate genetic beings that are just fused together and interchanging sugars and water.
So what kind of care do you have to give a tree?
Prune them. I spray the trees when I fertilize them with fish oil fertilizer spray. Applied foliar. It soaks in through the leaves and feeds them like that.
And is that the only feeding that they get?
Pretty much, yeah. If they're young and growing, sometimes I'll do a granular fertilizer also, just to give them extra nitrogen. But I've come around to really doing the foliar fertilizing because I think it's less wasteful. I really want to pinpoint and maximize, make sure that gets into the tree and the grass doesn't eat it all.
That seems counterintuitive. It doesn't seem natural to be feeding trees through their leaves.
It just seems weird, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it really works good.
Yeah.
You can start to see it, just a couple days later, like the color of those leaves completely greens up and
wow,
the waxiness on them is noticeable. And so I've come around to really liking that.
They're more complex than I imagine.
Also, this orchard is spaced like for farming with horses and carts and the big trees, so it's like 20-foot spacing. And when you have an old tree like this, it's like, well, where are the roots? There's definitely a lot not solid roots around here, anyways. So it's total gambling. Like, where am I gonna put my fertilizer? Unless you're gonna cover the whole thing, there's no way. But you can't really know that it's gonna get to the roots, you know.
So you were saying this is homesteaded by Italians?
Yeah, I believe it was the Panizera family. For years lived here, and the old homestead was down here in this area, and there's old plantings that go along with it that survived. But the story is that they feuded with the family across the canyon, and it was over one of the boys from one of the family had married the young girl from the Fiore family. The lane is named after, and because of the feud, they would come over and they would burn their house down, and the house was built and burned down 7 times.
Good Lord.
But I got that from a couple different sources. This is the foundation for the old still. They're making apple brandy. Some of the old timers told me in Prohibition times, every little canyon in this area had a still going. So
do you think they were selling it as well? Or?
Yeah, I bet they did. I was told they used to make the peaches from here when it was Peach Orchard, used to go to make the pies at the Union Hotel. So they were all well connected. Channels of commerce through their family ties, I'm sure.
So apple brandy would start with cider?
Yeah, you got to ferment your apple juice into cider or apple wine, and then distill it down into.
So what part of the still do you think this is? Is it like a fire pit or something?
Yeah, I think this is the fire pit. I think they had the gravity feed coming from a little bit higher up, pass through the still, and I think that it would dump out right here. And I think this little channel maybe ran down there, goes down back into the creek.
So how's the local cider business? Are there more breweries coming up? Or?
Well, the whole cider scene in the U.S. started to get a lot of steam, like in the last 10 years, and it's booming all over. There's a number of local cideries around here. Really two parts of the cider making scene, where there's the ones who are making cider in large volume, not really from their own orchards. They buy the juice somewhere else, and that's the mass cider. A lot of it's got a little bit of sweetness. And then there's the ones who are doing what they call like orchard-based cider, where they're trying to work with terroir and express the properties of the individual varieties through the cider. And that's a tougher angle, but a lot of people are doing it because it's it's a very interesting one.
More interesting,
that's,
right.
That's where a lot of
Right.
the art comes into it, and the aesthetics. This is one of the oldest generation of trees, but this is an Arkansas black. One winter it got so completely hollow it just split and splayed itself out in all directions, and instead of cutting it down, I decided to start training it as like a jungle gym tree for the kids. But then I also started to get into grafting, and I started grafting onto it, and that worked so good I just kept grafting onto it and getting more and more different varieties, to where I think at its height it had about 130 varieties on this one tree.
Good grief.
And I've been grafting onto it for about 13 years. Yeah. And what it's done is it actually, where it buried the tips of its branches in the soil, it rooted. And so it's got new root systems out here. And it's a great way to try out a new apple and see what it's like, is you don't have to grow the whole tree. You put a piece of scion wood on it. You could even potentially have a fruit that first year if there was a fruit bud in that piece of wood that you grafted on. But
Wow.
certainly by the second or third year, you can try out that apple and see if it interests you or not.
So now we're actually going to get to try some of the cider that's come from this orchard. And what is this? Who brewed this?
Is a Wicks and Crabapple single varietal, single orchard cider from Vulture Hill Orchard, made by Tilted Shed Cider Works in Windsor.
Cheers. Well, this calls for no mask, obviously. At last. Cheers.
Cheers.
Ah, it reminds me of England. Mm,
Isn't that nice?
yeah. That's not your old American hard cider, so-called.
No.
No, this
They
really
do a,
this really reminds me of England. It's great.
Wild fermented too, so it's got all the
Yeah,
microbiology from the orchard
yeah,
in here
it's
too.
sharp. It's got a little bit of a bite to it. Great.